we have to sort of be self-possessed. We have to be confident enough and secure enough in who we are to be able to say, this is what I want around me. Right? If I'm getting a bad response from these things around me, then I remove them. And that's really hard to do, I understand, right? It's the same notion of family versus chosen family. And people still struggle with that. Part of it is that if we feel self-possessed and confident enough, it's a way to sort of help navigate a difficult or toxic world. I hate to say that it's sort of like an armor, because it's not an armor. It's a strength, really, that allows us to sort of move around in a world and feel confident and assured in who we are, so that someone's negativity and toxicity isn't going to do the same amount of damage that it would. We have to be self-possessed and confident enough to say no.
Welcome to My Therapist is Out. Each episode, we talk with a therapist from Open Space Therapy Collective or LGBT community members about mental health and building community. I'm your host, Renae Johnson, licensed therapist and founder of Open Space Therapy Collective, where we are your hub for queer and trans mental health care.
As we dive into today's topic, please keep in mind that this is a mental health podcast. We will talk about sensitive and difficult issues that are not appropriate for all audiences. Please take care while listening.
Welcome back to My Therapist is Out. I am really excited about our conversation today. We are going to go really deep into shame and sexuality and what is really going on in queer community when we bring those things up in a lived experience. Today, I am honored to have Alex Garner with me. Alex is a Senior Director of Strategic Initiatives and Communications at MPact Global, which is a huge, important organization within our community and is doing incredible work. So I feel very honored to have Alex with us today. As part of our Queer Hearts, Healthy Starts, Breaking Toxic Relationship Patterns, this is going to be a really interesting conversation because we are going both into what's really personal for somebody's lived experience with having HIV and what is happening in queer community, both in intimate relationships, friendships, and bigger community when you're coming in with different sexualities and different baggage, and really unpacking that today. So Alex, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Can you introduce yourself a little bit more to our audience and introduce MPact Global a little bit so people can get more familiar?
Sure, happy to. So as you said, I'm the Senior Director of Strategic Initiatives and Communications at MPact. And that basically means I manage most of our programs as well as all of our communications. MPact is a global organization that works to advance queer health and human rights. We've been around for 20 years. In fact, we're celebrating our 20th anniversary this year. We work in countries all over the globe with over 50 to 60 community-based organizations, both supporting them in terms of the work that they're doing and advancing LGBTQ rights in global settings, more sort of high-level organizations. And it's a joy to do.
Amazing. What personally brought you to doing this work, and what keeps you here as somebody who's been dedicated to this part of your career and community for so long?
So yeah, I've been doing this sort of work for over 30 years now. I started quite young. This has always sort of been part of my experience. I started political activism when I was about 17, 18 years old, even when I was still in high school. And then in college, when I sort of came to understand my sexuality and came out, then my political activism really took off. And politics have always been central to my perspective and experience, even from a very early age. I mean, I used to participate in grape boycotts when I was, like 10 years old. So it's always been central to me. And I'm a very big believer that the personal is political. So it informs everything.
That's amazing. Can you talk a little bit more about the personal is political and your framework and how you engage with that?
Sure. I mean, I think part of it is, I also was fortunate enough to come out in the early 90s. And this was sort of when queer theory was starting. And I was lucky enough to take queer culture and queer theory classes at the university, UCSD. And it helped reinforce this idea that who I was as a person and what I was experiencing was also political, and that particularly was in regards to our sexuality. So what we choose to do with our bodies, how we decide to pursue pleasure. And this was at a time when technically being gay was still criminalized in the US. Same-sex sexual relations were not decriminalized until this century. So it's being gay at that time and being gay now in different parts of the world, how you choose to express your sexuality, how you choose to express your gender is not confined to our bodies, because how people interact with us and how the laws interact with us. And so it's, for me, it's unavoidable that who I am and what my sexual identity and gender expression are, it's unavoidable that they're part of my politics and part of the political narrative, both in the US and globally.
Yeah, I think it's really important, and I'm glad you're noting this, that this isn't a new thing with all of the anti-LGBTQ and anti-trans legislation that's trying to get pushed through. And it seems like that's, especially for our younger family, seems like it's new, right? And like, oh my God, all of a sudden we're getting attacked again. But the 90s was not that long ago. That's, 30 years ago. And it was happening then. It's happening now. Hopefully this is the last push, but there's a piece of that where personally we're just like living our lives and being embodied and having our relationships and being who we are. And it's often when people outside of us reflect back to us, hey, something's quote unquote different, or something's quote unquote bad, that then the shame and the baggage and all of that stuff starts to come in. And that can be from friends, family, politics at large. But I think often in conversation, especially with people who aren't queer, think that that's something that we are constantly feeling different, our bodies are different, or whatever, when oftentimes we're just being ourselves, and it's not till that reflection comes back in.
Well, we're different in terms of how we experience the world and how the world experiences us, right? And I think that second part of how the world experiences us is the important part, because it's also not just queer people, it's women, it's people of color, it's indigenous people, it's migrants. The world has unfortunately decided how they're going to treat us. And in nearly 70 countries in the world, same-sex sexual behavior is still criminalized. And so it's so easy for them to be able to see us as criminals, and that automatically makes us second-class citizens, right? You can't have access to housing, employment, all sorts of things are essentially taken away from you when you're classified as a criminal. And I think it also elicits a certain amount of fear and anxiety within us, but it also causes us to be angry. And that's not a bad thing, right? This notion of queer rage is how we can channel and mobilize our communities to create change, because that anger and rage has to go somewhere. And it can be super productive if we can utilize it for activism and creating change.
Well said. How does somebody with HIV fall into this umbrella when we're talking about lived experience, and then how people engage with somebody who has HIV, whether that's out of the queer community or within queer community?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us now in 2026, HIV for queer people, gay men in particular, HIV is incidental to our lives. We've always lived in a world in which HIV existed. And so we've had to navigate our sexuality within a world where HIV exists. And usually that meant fear and anxiety and stigma. And I think I've been positive now for 30 years. And for me, it's old hat, right? I've been positive more years than I've been negative, right? And so for me, it's always been part of who I am and my perspective and how I relate to the world. But I think what we've seen happen with HIV from the very beginning, I mean, it was originally called GRID, right? Gay related immune disease. And so it was always centered around gay men and gay sex and everyone's in power, their discomfort with it and their response to it. And that hasn't really gone away in 30 years. It's transformed in different ways. And so I think part of the challenge of living with HIV and living openly with HIV is that the world can be a difficult and hostile place sometimes. And HIV is still criminalized in many countries around the globe and in parts of the US. People are being, in Senegal, for example, they're doing raids and rounding up and arresting gay men. In particular, they're exposing their HIV status and they're sort of including HIV criminalization as part of this attack on gay rights. So it hasn't gone away. I think for people like me, the world around me is open and friendly enough that it makes for better conditions. But it also has created a certain level of resilience, for lack of a better word, that people living with HIV can stand up and speak out and still find and pursue a life that's about joy and sexual pleasure and community. So it's difficult. It can be difficult, but I think we have the skills to work through it.
It's interesting with your organization being so global and so involved to have the perspective of what's happening here, both in, personal communities when you have a big queer family that you're in, and then you're looking at countries like Senegal where everything has to be so closed and hidden, or the consequences of not doing that are so drastic. How do you and your team balance holding those different experiences?
I mean, I think fundamentally, we're all drawn together by our shared experiences. And one of our primary shared experiences as gay bi queer folks is sex, right? We all have at some point had to navigate understanding our sexuality and finding someone often of the same gender to have sex with, and all of the things that go along with that, right? So I think that fundamental shared experience helps us relate to one another, but in terms of the work that MPact is doing, it also allows us to look at our community members and approach them holistically. It's not just about risk, it's not just about sexual health, it's about all of the things in our lives that inform how we experience the world. And for us, it's also about being able to, we're a global organization. We originated in the US. We have a certain privilege, for lack of a better word, to be able to speak out and not face the same consequences that people on the ground might. So if we can do it, we have an obligation to do it. We're happy to do it. And we can accept those risks so that they don't have to. And I think part of it is to be able to work in collaboration with folks on the ground to figure out the best way we can protect and defend their rights. But when there is a voice that needs to be amplified, or when there's an issue that needs to be pushed forward, if we're able to do it, we're happy to be able to do that for those who can't.
How do you keep your relationships within your colleagues healthy? Because this is really stressful and everybody's coming into it with their own perspectives and own agendas. And while everybody's trying to make things better, that's going to be really, I would imagine, can be really heated at times. And to do this work effectively, you and your colleagues have to keep your relationships within each other healthy and active. What are you all doing to make that happen?
I mean, I think part of it is one, we're a small team, that helps. And we're entirely remote, so everyone sort of has the flexibility to work from home and navigate their time and emotions around that. But I think it's also important for us to be able to find these moments of joy or relaxation or connection. And I think for me, when I'm able to work with folks on the ground and see what they're doing, seeing how they're responding to the world around them, see how they're able to cultivate their sexual orientation amidst all of these things, that is a profound source of inspiration because I think, wow, they're able to do these things under very difficult conditions and they're still moving forward and they're still having a great time and they're still having sex and meeting boys and then we're also able to connect and talk about these sorts of things. So I think fundamentally it becomes this question of how do we form and create community. And so part of it is the community that we create with the folks that we're working with on the ground, and then part of it is the community that we create with the folks that we're working with. It doesn't mean you have to be with them 24/7. It means this sense of support, the sense of connection, the sense of shared experience. And I think that only strengthens the work that we're doing.
It's a beautiful thing to be able to pull on being inspired by each other and by community as the touchstone to come back to connection. Because we can get in the weeds about, well, we should take this strategy and do this thing, and we need to manage that person because they might pop off and this, but to step out of that and be like, this, what everybody is doing is really meaningful and powerful and inspiring, and using that to pull back into connection and joy instead of using the fight as the touchstone is a really beautiful thing that you all are doing, and I think can get a little lost when we are trying so hard to be safe, be a part of the larger community, be ourselves. So I really appreciate that perspective. Pivoting a little bit, shame and blame come in a lot when we're talking about sexuality and HIV and identity and all those things. How are you seeing that affect the work that you're doing, both from how people are, from the outside, how people are being treated, but also how people are showing up?
Yeah, I mean, that's such a central part to the work that we do and all of the issues that our communities face. And I think in particular when it comes to HIV, so when someone gets a new diagnosis and they're told they're HIV positive for the first time, usually they have two immediate reactions. One is, I'm going to die, and two is, I'm never going to have sex again. Scientifically, we've solved the dying part. We know how to ensure that people can get on treatment and stay healthy for the rest of their lives and live a normal lifespan. But we haven't done a lot around the fear and anxiety around sex. So part of the work that we've been doing at MPact is ensuring that people living with HIV understand that there's a community out there that is going to support and take them in, and that they can still have a fulfilling sexuality. I think that becomes central because sexuality is so personal and it's so intimate. And when we feel rejected or when we feel like we can't have this connection with someone because of HIV, then it creates these limitations and barriers that can only increase depression and anxiety, for example. But I think part of what we've seen is when people are able to speak openly and honestly about their sexual desires, their sexuality, their pursuit of pleasure, it opens them up, right? It allows them to connect with each other. It allows them to feel confident in who they are and their body and their sexuality. And it also can be a source of mobilization for them. They understand the political ramifications of what it means when your sexuality is stigmatized. And so, for example, one of the projects that we created a couple of years ago was centered around bringing queer positive people together to build community because of all of the benefits that go along with community, but also it helped spark activism across the region and in particular in Mexico City, which is where I am right now. Because we saw that there were a large number of queer HIV positive activists who were already mobilized, who wanted to be more active, who wanted to see change happen. And we were able to work with them to integrate some of these things and say, let's talk about stigma, let's talk about sex, let's figure out how we can speak openly and honestly about our sexuality as people living with HIV so that we can feel good about our sexuality, we can resist stigma, and it also allows people in the broader community to see that. And it can be a demonstration that, yes, you can live with HIV, and yes, you can be happy, and yes, you can be healthy, and yes, you can have a sexuality. And that benefits not just positive people who can see that demonstration, but negative guys can witness that as well. And it can strengthen their relationship to the broader community, and it can reduce the fear they might have around what it means to live with HIV.
Hey, Renae popping in just for a minute to say thank you for listening. We really hope you are enjoying the conversation today. Any chance you have to rate, review, subscribe, and share with a friend makes a huge impact, and we greatly appreciate it. If you have extra bandwidth and want to support the show even further, you can go to mytherapistisout.com and click the donate button. Any donations from $5 a month to a one-time donation makes a huge difference for us. We're a little self-published podcast, so any extra dollar helps. Again, go to mytherapistisout.com and hit donate. Now back to the show. In your own journey, how did you get there? Because this isn't, people come into therapy, for example, and be like, here's my issue. I want to have one conversation about it, and then it's fixed. And I wish that was the way that things worked, but it doesn't. So what was your process like to get to the point where now you can shed a lot of that shame and blame and do this type of work?
Yeah, well, I should start by saying I'm a very big believer in therapy. I think it's great for everyone. I certainly have taken part in it in my life, and I probably am the type of person, like you just said, who would walk in and say, "Let's talk about this. We have an hour. We're gonna get it done. Let's go." But I think I am 53 now, so I have a lot of life experience behind me to draw from. I think I also was really lucky that when it came to my sexuality, I had issues growing up with what understanding my sexuality and being comfortable with who I was. And I was called fag like every day of my life. But at a certain point, I at least chose that they can call me that all they want, but it's not going to affect me in the same way. I am this faggot, right? And then once I sort of declared that, then anything that they threw at me didn't have that same sort of impact, right? It was this acceptance of who I was regardless of people's reaction. And so I was also lucky that I didn't have this sort of profound sense of shame around the sex I was having. Misunderstanding or confusion, yes. Discomfort, anxiety, yes, but it wasn't shame. And as in someone who grew up in a Catholic family and Catholic school, oddly enough, shame wasn't part of it. So I think that helped me considerably. But I think the one part, and this is a universal experience for gay men of the past 45 years, is that we had to foster our sexuality amidst an epidemic. And amidst HIV prevention campaigns that scared us. And so growing up and cultivating a sexuality and a sexual identity when there's so much fear and anxiety around the sex that we're having can really do harm. And I think for me, I felt like HIV wasn't a matter of if, it was a matter of when. And that was a common experience for men of my generation. And so when HIV finally happened, part of it was a relief. And part of it was this sense of, okay, now I can move forward. I understand what this thing is, and I understand what the things that are at my disposal to respond to it. And I had a great source of support around me. So that was really helpful in terms of my friends and the community. And I think that's always going to be super important for other people as they're making their way in this journey.
It makes me think about the parents of our queer teens. And a lot of them are lovely and wonderful and like really trying, but are nervous because this, as their teen is coming out, this is also their first experience into what it is like to live as a queer person, and having HIV be part of that experience. What would you say to the parents of these queer teens about coming into this world and what they can do to help support and what the options are around HIV care?
I think specifically around HIV, I think parents need to sort of unlearn probably a lot of the things that they've learned about HIV, a lot of the fear that they have around HIV. And they also need to accept the fact that HIV for gay, queer people, it's part of our lives. It's incidental to our experience. And so parents need to understand that and figure out the best way to respond to that. And so when it comes to things like sexual health, sexual education, we want parents to be able to speak openly, unashamedly about sex, to give people options to protect their sexual health, get them vaccinated, take them in for checkups, offer them options around things like PrEP, um, so that young queer people can feel like they have choices, they can feel empowered in their sexuality, and that it's connected, that their sexuality is something that's valuable and important. And I think part of it is also unlearning this idea that getting HIV is something that getting HIV is something that is someone's fault, right? Parents need to unlearn this idea that if someone got HIV, they did something wrong, or they were stupid, or they were reckless, or they were irresponsible, because it's difficult to exist in this world and have sex and not get bacteria or a virus. And so I think part of that understanding is realizing that if someone gets HIV, it wasn't because they were a failure, either as parents or as the individual, because the things that failed us are the structures and the systems, right? Our lack of access to healthcare, stigma, homophobia, poverty, racism. Those are the reasons why people still get HIV, not because they were a bad person or did something wrong.
Mhm. Yeah, parents really have an opportunity to side with the kid instead of side with society. They have an opportunity to be that person that doesn't build on the shame train that the kid is probably already starting to hear and collect, and really, as you're saying, unlearn so they can be a really sweet and connected parent as they are navigating this with their kid. Let's talk about what's happening right now, because our world has changed a lot in the last few years. What is happening both within the states that's different, but also how is that ripple effect happening globally for HIV and queer community, and what are you seeing that's different, and what are you seeing that's maybe from the 90s that's kind of the same thing getting replayed?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the first things that I like to tell people when we talk about all of the bad things that are happening around the global health and HIV is that we've been here before. And so the 80s and 90s can be a great lesson for us in terms of how people responded. And conditions that, it's an apples and oranges. Conditions that were horrible, conditions that now are horrible. But I think that part of it is reassuring people, yes, we've been here before and we made it through. We've been here before and it created great activism, great art, great community. So I think we also need to, people are so naturally inclined to just sort of want to feel like trauma and hair on the fire, and we need to sort of ground ourselves and think about what needs to get done, right? We need to get to work basically, And I think what we found at MPact is that also means stepping forward as opposed to stepping back. So many LGBT organizations or so many queer people have been afraid with everything that's happening, and so they draw back naturally. But we want to be able to step forward and say, no, we're here, we exist, we have value, and we're important, and these are the things that need to get done. And so with all of the HIV cuts that were happening, with the move towards the right, all of these countries, many of these countries who are creating new or strengthening their existing anti-LGBTQ laws, we have to figure out not just ways to support folks on the ground who are living in these hostile conditions, but how do we think about short-term change and long-term change? How do we invest in our community so that they feel supported and strengthened to fight against these changes in policies, to figure out where to get resources from, but still maintain a sense of community and maintain a sense of moving forward towards something better. And I think one of the interesting things that we've seen in the last couple of years with what's happening and organizations that we've been working with on the ground is that many of them have had to become more innovative and more creative and ingenious about how they get things done. And that sort of thing is always inspiring and exciting, because even in the most difficult conditions, we persist, right? And it's hard, and there are going to be some considerable losses, but as a community, we will go on, and change will eventually arrive.
I know there's a lot of conversations that I'm having, and I'm curious what the conversations are like in your community around being tired and being like, we are many years into this again, and people have hit a burnout point, and they're trying to figure out and balance I need to take a break to take care of myself and like recharge. But I have so much guilt and shame around doing that. And then the folks that are pushing through and creating more distress and being less effective in the work, and kind of the balance of that. And so it's not being, like you're talking about, like not leading with fear, leading with courage and self and connection, and being able to balance, not creating like toxicity within yourself in doing that. How are you all doing that? How are you balancing that? Because it's a lot of work and it demands a lot of you.
Well, it's so funny because that seems like such a timely question in the sense that, RuPaul just talked about responding to the world around us and sort of going to the dance floor and just finding joy, right? Madonna, her album, it's the same thing, right? She talks about what it means to sort of find community on the dance floor. And certainly for MPact, we just updated our logo, and it's a disco ball, right? It's meant to represent this idea that as in the past 40, 50 years, we have, as a queer people, have found community on the dance floor. We found a way to find joy and connection with one another. I would never want someone to feel guilty because, today they didn't do enough organizing, they didn't do enough activism. We all have to be able to balance our lives that we live, that have value, with the work that we do. And sometimes it's, taking to the dance floor, it's listening to music, even if it's by yourself dancing around your apartment. And then sometimes it's with other people, because that connection becomes so important to help you sort of revive and refresh. But I think that no one should ever feel guilty that they're not doing enough when they're doing the work, right? I think what we've found, especially nowadays, is that we live in a world where you really can't just sit on the sidelines. Everything that we do is political. Everything around us, you have to sort of make some choice to take a stand on something. And I think that's where we need more people to do that. Like the people who are doing the work, they deserve a break. But I think what we need is more people who are willing to invest in our community, who are willing to take a stand, who are willing to speak up. People who can, right? There are plenty of people who can't because of the world in which they live, but there are plenty of people who can, and not enough of them are doing that. And so I think that also helps balance out that also helps balance out this idea of sharing the work, right? Because if more people are actively participating, then other folks can, take a breath and take a break. And those are just as important. Breaks and rest are just as important as the work because they all function together.
As people are taking a break, and I hope that they are, how do people figure out who is friends, lovers, community that are healthy to connect with and to spend time seeking joy with and finding those respite places with? Because we have a tendency to be like, oh, they're part of the queer family, they're great, when that's not always the case. And even if they are great, they may not be great for you. And so how do you suggest people look for or connect with, okay, this person is going to be a healthy person for me that will bring joy, will offer connection, and this person is maybe not the right match, or this group is not the right match?
That's the $64 million question. I mean, I think that is, we all struggle with that. Like, who do we have around us and when do we get rid of them? Right. Because it's not healthy for us. But I think the best answer I can come up with is that we have to sort of be self-possessed. And by that, what I mean is we have to be confident enough and secure enough in who we are to be able to say, this is what I want around me. Right. If I'm getting a bad response from these things around me, then I remove them. And that's really hard to do, I understand. Right. It's the same notion of family versus chosen family. And people still struggle with that. Right. But I think part of it is that if we feel self-possessed and confident enough, uh, it's a way to sort of help navigate a difficult or toxic world. So that I hate to say that it's sort of like an armor because it's not an armor. It's a strength really, that allows us to sort of move around in a world and feel confident and assured in who we are, so that someone's negativity and toxicity isn't going to do the same amount of damage that it would. And I think part of it is we have to be self-possessed and confident enough to say no, and it's enough. And as queer people and people who are doing the work in our communities, it can be a difficult thing to do. But I think we're also really good at being able to set boundaries sometimes because we've had to live through situations where those boundaries weren't as clear. And so it was a lesson, a life lesson that allowed us to, at a later point, establish stronger boundaries.
Yeah. Yeah. That concept of being self-possessed is such an important one to check in on. And intuition comes in there a lot, right? Because there may be somebody that you're around or a group that you're involved with that you're like, every check is, or every box is checked, this makes sense, but I still feel on edge. Something still feels, and you don't have to burn a bridge. Like, that's very dramatic. But, stepping away and being like, okay, maybe this isn't, that maybe there's something else going on here that's not aligning me to actually get that respite or to actually celebrate. And pivoting it to something where your gut feelings is resonating more with that self-possession and really being able to trust that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a really big believer in intuition. And I should say my intuition. I rely I rely a lot on my own intuition. I know usually within like the first minute of meeting someone, sort of what's there. And it served me well 95% of my experiences. There've been a few times when it hasn't been as good, but so yeah, I'm a very big believer in it, and I think more people sort of need to tap into it and leverage it.
Thank you so much for joining me today. You've brought up a lot to chew on, and I really appreciate your perspective and the work that you and your team are doing. Where can people find you and where can people connect?
Sure. So our website is mpactglobal.org. Our socials are mpact.global on Instagram and impact global on X, Twitter, and Facebook and TikTok. And we have lots of content from our recent projects. Some of them are health promotion projects that we did in collaboration with various social media influencers, including adult content creators. And some of it are campaigns that we've done around sexual education and living with HIV. And that's globally as well. So some of it's in English, some of it's in Spanish, some of it's in Portuguese, and a few other languages.
Amazing. Do you have any projects coming up that you're looking for people to get involved in?
Sure. I mean, I think that depends on where people are, right?
Sure.
Because as a global organization, where our footprint is all over the place. But I think that there's two ways that people can get involved. One is online, obviously, in terms of social media engagement, and content that we create. And we're able to create content with people even if they're sort of not in a studio, for example, with us side by side. Obviously, if people want to donate, then we invite them to do that. Not everyone can, so we understand that. And in terms of upcoming events, so this July, the International AIDS Conference will be in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. This July, we'll be celebrating our 20th anniversary with an event during the conference, and we'll have activities throughout the conference. So if people find themselves in Rio de Janeiro, then certainly they can participate with us in person at the conference and during the activities that we'll be having at the conference.
Amazing. That's so exciting that y'all have made it 20 years and are still going strong and are not pulling back and really keeping not just the fight alive, but the joy alive in the process. So I know our team really appreciates you and all the work that y'all are doing.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
To end, speaking of joy and celebration, we end with a queer moment of joy. Do you have one that stands out for you, whether it's a recent new moment or something old and special?
Sure, I do. So I was just in Indonesia a few weeks ago in Jakarta. So we have a project at MPact that we are working on with some partners in Indonesia, and they hosted a training that we worked in collaboration with them on this training. And the joy that I'm talking about is, so this was a training of about 30 queer folks in Indonesia. And I think that for me to be able to work with them, to see how passionate they were about the work that needs to be done, how engaged they were, while conditions for queer people in Indonesia have become more and more difficult. The police are arresting people and trotting them out in public in front of the cameras and trying to humiliate them, and people are getting lashed in public in certain parts of Indonesia. And so what I found so joyful about that was sort of their joy, right? To be able to witness their joy, their ability to still connect and want to do the work and laugh and have fun and flirt and all of these sorts of things, wasn't just inspirational, and that certainly was profoundly inspirational, but it was also joyful to see that people can still and will continue to find joy under these difficult circumstances. And that always gets me.
That's beautiful. It's an amazing thing when the response to something that can be so intense, to say the least, is to lean towards joy. I love that.
Sure.
Okay. Thank you again, Alex. We will post all the links in the show notes, and please reach out to Alex's team at MPact Global to get connected and involved.
Hi, my name is Renae. I use he, him pronouns, and my recent queer moment of joy is when I came out to my parents right after I graduated college.
Hi, I'm Lara, pronouns she, her, and my queer joy on this experience has been on the road trip here, which was 14 hours. I had no idea what I was really signing up for. I thought it was like, oh, just like another regular festival of like music. And then I found out 2 hours prior that it was workshops, queer workshops. Am I allowed to swear? Fucking great. And then I got super stoked, and this is awesome. I don't want to go to any other festivals. I like some gay workshops.
Thanks for joining us. If you're in California and looking for a therapist, visit our website at openspacetherapycollective.com and book a free intro call with one of our therapists.
If you're enjoying My Therapist Is Out, please rate, review, and follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Do you know somebody who could use a little extra dose of queer community? Send them one of your favorite episodes of My Therapist Is Out and help our collective grow one listen at a time. My Therapist Is Out is an open space therapy collective podcast, and our podcast editing is done by Rachel Peltzer and Smash and Grab Studio. We'd love to hear from you about today's topic, so email us at info@openspacetherapycollective.com. You can find us on TikTok and Instagram at Open Space Therapy Collective. Thanks for listening.